Welcome back to Is It Crazy or Is It God?
Hey, what's up, guys? What's going on?
I'd rather not answer that.
Another.
Oh, hi. Okay.
Got an Alexa. All right, so.
Well, welcome back to Is It Crazy or Is It God? Where we talk about our adventures in reading the Bible. We want to invite you along with us. And we're having a great time with this, by the way. This is very insightful and educational and fun, I might add. I got so much out of this text.
Yeah.
And it was just kind of like, we're going to get into everything, but it's just so relevant to the way that we think and act and the way that we do things. And I just always find peace when I'm reading. When we're reading together, I always just find peace in the word. So,
yeah, man. I learned it's very interesting this week. We'll get into it, but I read God is very specific. And you should follow his instructions. Also, what would happen in today's society if this was going on, but we'll get to that. And it's just an interesting perspective.
Yeah. So why don't you jump in? How was your week?
Oh, she beat me to it. I gotta answer first. Oh man, my week was actually really good. My birthday was this week.
Yes.
Our anniversary was this week.
Our anniversary was this week. 4 years in, guys.
4 years in. And she hasn't got rid of me yet. So
oh my gosh, I'm not going to get rid of her.
Hopefully I'm doing something good.
Man,
but
it's getting better every day. It's like...
Yeah. It is.
Yeah, anyway, I'm cutting you off. How was your week?
It was good, and I got to follow one of my mantras that I always talk about. I tell myself this in my affirmations: rest, reflect, repeat. And that's what this week was about.
Yeah.
Rest, reflect, and repeat. Reorganizing. Doing some learning. And not on work, just within myself. And I'm learning to be a little bit more confident in what I say, and getting used to trying to be uncomfortable.
Yes.
And that's kind of like, if you're too comfortable at doing something, you need to be uncomfortable.
Yeah. Because if you're too comfortable, then you're probably not growing.
Yeah. Right. And growth is uncomfortable. And even in all stages in our lives, puberty was uncomfortable. Going from first grade to middle school was uncomfortable. High school to college. Right? Even from 17 to 18.
Yeah.
From 15 to 16. It's just, it is what it is. From 30 to 40.
Yeah.
So that's what I'm kind of... So the mantra for this week, I think I said that right, the message was rest, reflect, repeat. And I think I've been doing that pretty well. So that's what I did this week, and I'm really enjoying myself, and it was much needed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how was your week?
My week was very educational. I learned a lot this week, not even just about myself, but just about how certain systems work. I learned some things at work, some improvements I can make, just different things about my team members that I'm grateful for. It was just a learning week for sure. A lot is going on in the world around us, and I learned from those things too. And overall, I was just thinking about this earlier. It's so wild. The devil is at work. And I think a lot of the times I can confirm for myself. I'm not saying this is like even in the Bible or whatever. It's just something that I'm picking up as an observation. Is that you can tell when the devil's at work because nobody wins, right? It's not a triumph. Even if we're thinking about the March Madness, right?
Yeah.
And in the final four, somebody's going to come out a champion. Somebody's going to win. So there's a cause for celebration on at least one end of it, right? There's a win there, and then there's a celebration, and maybe the team who doesn't win isn't necessarily celebrating, but there's a celebration to be had, right? But then they'll also have a lesson and figure out whoever wins, right, what they can do differently moving forward. But that, I guess that's the overall when you face a challenge, is figuring out how you can help, how that can help to improve you, which is kind of like what I learned this week. I just was thinking to myself earlier, the devil is at work and it's real, and it makes me just want to get as close to God as possible. And nobody's perfect, but certain challenges and things just remind me, okay, you're going to face challenges, and you want to just be as close to God as you can possibly be. And I just get reminded of that a lot. So that's just what we're trying to do here anyway. I would think that's what we're all trying to do. And it's just like, God is very specific, and he requires you to make sacrifices for growth, but it's a win. God's going to use everything, even the stuff that the devil is working up.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? God uses everything for his good. So I just take just so much joy in the thought of that, and it just makes me want to be as close to him as possible, for as long as possible. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, my week was good. I enjoyed our anniversary. I enjoyed your birthday. My sister's birthday is the same birthday as James's, and it was just a good time this week. Good with challenging things, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot this week, and I'm excited to use what I learned to just keep getting better.
Yeah, man. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. Okay, so this week we're on.
We started Leviticus, right? We started Leviticus this week, so we did Leviticus 1 through 13 this week.
And Leviticus is a little bit difficult because it's very ancient customs and worshiping that necessary nowadays. This is very early, and so, well, I mean, let's get into it.
Yeah.
So, Leviticus 1 through 4, there were 4 different type of offerings, and I think I can name them on the top of my head.
Oh my gosh.
You have the burnt offering, the sin offering, the guilt offering, and the grain offering.
I think you're right. So they break down all the different offerings. They have a bunch of different offerings, and so we're just kind of seeing it be explained, right? Specifically instructions from God on which offerings, so the tabernacle has been built, it's complete, and now they did the customary, or I guess ordaining of Aaron and his sons, and all of that was very specific. And then we are getting breakdowns of which offerings are for what, right? So it's a different kind of animal, or it's a different kind of, like when he says grain offering, there's a certain way you have to do it. There are certain things that are sort of forbidden, like you can't do this, you can't do that, you have to do it this way. It's very, very specific. So you're going to get back into the offerings?
Yeah, I missed one. Peace offering.
The peace offering.
Yeah. So the 1 through 4 tells you the specific types of offering. So the burnt offering is for prayers of petition or praise, and then that deals with sheep, cattle, goats, or birds. All right. And then you have the grain offering, which is grains, unleavened bread though, no leaven, and frankincense and olive oil. And there's no animals involved in it. You have the peace offering. Oh, the grain offering is for pleasing aroma, and it smells. It's a great smell for the tabernacle. The peace offering is with fellowship with the Lord by having a communion meal.
Mm-hmm.
And the peace offering is cattle, sheep, and goats.
Yeah.
Okay? Then we have the sin offering, which is atonement for sin, purification. So, forgiveness of sins is what you have to do if you sin. And it has to deal with cattle, sheep, goats, and birds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And then you have the guilt offering. This is atonement for committing sins, but you're saying that I've done wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the only can be done with rams. That's the only one. So that's those are the different type of offerings. So 1 through 4 just explains, what type of offerings, and it gets
kind of graphic with
graphic.
The blood and the way that the sort of like the animals are dealt with. Like you got to kill an animal, and there's a specific thing that they do with the blood. Either they sprinkle it or they put some on somebody's earlobe.
The fat. And
the specific thing you got to do with the fat and I forget what they call it. You called it sweetbread, but it was
entrails.
The what?
Entrails.
Entrails. That's what they named it, and that's what it's named in the Bible. Yeah. But it's basically the liver and the
kidney.
I guess the organs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it was graphic, but a lot of things can be graphic, and but obviously in our present day, we aren't making these kinds of offerings, right? We mostly make offerings of time and of like tithes and things like that. So we joked about how weird it would be if James was out in the backyard trying to make a burnt offering to the Lord. How we wouldn't do that, but we were like, what would happen? Wouldn't somebody call the police? Yes. Like, he's got a goat out there. He's like,
it's very graphic.
So it's graphic, but it was just like, obviously that was the custom back then.
They would lock me up in a crazy house if I did that.
That was the custom back then. Yeah. I would not let you do that, honey. I would be like, let's also reconsider.
Here's the thing, right? This was only done in the tabernacle by a priest. Mm-hmm. So you could not. We'll learn later why you couldn't just do it. It has to be like, so far we've learned the Lord is very specific in his instructions. He's very detailed. So you can't just do it on your own. You're gonna have to make atonement for that. Mm-hmm. You just can't do that. You have to have it without blemish. You have to bring it to the priest, and then you have to go to the tabernacle. You can't just do it. And I think the priest picked the animal. So it's not, you just can't do it. There's consequences for that. So here's the question. Why does God say it's cathartic to give offerings? Why does God say it is to give the offerings after you've done something wrong?
So I don't remember reading that in the text, but I mean, I have an answer for it.
Yeah,
it's a sacrifice, right? So like when you do something, so this is specifically talking about when you've done wrong, because there's there's a lot of things. Either you can give offerings for different things, but right here we're talking about like a sin or when you've done something wrong. So I would think that we know that back in the day, livestock was considered sort of like riches. The more animals you have and the more you have. Animals are used to help with the land. You can eat them. You can use them for clothing, their fur and their skin and stuff like that. So it means that you have goods, right? You can do services, and it's basically a part of being rich when you're back in the day. So if you're giving an offering of one of your animals, first of all, one of the things it kept mentioning is that it had to be without blemish. And it kind of gets into what we read at the latter part of the week, what a blemish might be considered. If you remember, we were talking about the boils and the stuff that could be on the animals, whatever, the leprosy. So if you're giving an animal without blemish, my assumption is that that's a cleaner animal and it's without disease. So you're basically out of the livestock that you have that you could use to breed other animals, you could use to do all these things that I just mentioned. You're sacrificing that animal to God, and in one case you're eating it. You're having a feast, which is sort of like fellowship. It just, I would think that it's cathartic to do that because you're sacrificing something, right? You're going without to sort of show your love for God. And because they were specific instructions, I would think it's cathartic because you know you're doing the right thing. God has instructed you to do something and you're being obedient. And so for those reasons, I would think it would be cathartic because you're sacrificing something that is important to you that you could benefit from not sacrifice, right? If you kept it, you would have all your stuff. But the fact that you're giving it away means that you're losing out. So it's cathartic because you know you're just proving your faith. You're being obedient and you're giving it to God. And because I did this wrong thing, all right, that's what the question is. This kind of helps us to move forward. Like, this is my action that is stating that I know that I did wrong and here's what I'm going to do about it. I'm going to give something up and I'm going to do it in the way that God said. And then once you do that, it's got to feel like a weight is lifted. Like, okay, now moving right along.
Yeah.
That's what I think. I don't know if that was in the text and I missed it, the answer to that. Why does God say it's cathartic to give the offerings after you do something wrong? Did you remember reading that?
I don't remember. I just remember them breaking down
of the instructions.
But I would have to agree with you. That's what I think it is. I mean, we were reading and having a discussion of how valuable livestock is. And stock is still valuable to this day. It's just not mentioned in live. It's just not live, right? So back then, stocks. So think about it, right? If you take an animal without blemish, just like you said, man, so many things that, especially with animals, if you get an animal without blemish, that means it can create other animals without blemish, which makes it more valuable. You know, it's like having a champion horse. It's like having bloodlines. So that's another thing. Like you said, if you have an animal without blemish, it's valuable. And I think because you can do so much, if you sin, you know, or if you don't and you want to do a peace offering, it's of value to you. So, like, I think God knows what's valuable to us.
Yeah, and I'm just reading right here where it says, just one of our study Bibles is pointing out that this text focuses on more of the fundamental aspects of the sacrifices, like how to do it and other stuff. The mention of a pleasing aroma implies that the sacrifice results in the Lord's favor towards the offerer. So you would think that would be cathartic, right? Like just the obedience of it, and the fact that it's a pleasing aroma to the Lord just means that you're gonna find favor in His sight. So that's got to feel a weight, you know what I mean? Like a weight lifted.
Especially when you know He's present. Like we know He's present. He's all around us. But back then, it specifically says that it's a cloud. Like, you know, oh, God's here.
Yeah.
You know, like the Lord.
Yeah.
The Holy One.
Yeah.
The one that has saved us. Oh, man, I just sinned. Let's get a sheep.
Right. Like, there's something you can do about it.
Something I can do about it. It's not like,
I messed up. Now I just got to be scared.
Yeah, it's like, no. Yeah, I can only imagine of how much they're praying. And it also says, listen, if you can't give up, you can pay.
Yeah, the shekels of silver.
The shekels of silver, which is valuable back then, right?
Yeah.
Silver, gold, livestock, these are things that they're still valuable to this day.
Yeah.
And it all comes from the earth. So I think he was pleased if we, give up something that is valuable to us. Leviticus 5-7 breaks down more offerings.
Yeah, and
So
like I said, it just gets really specific.
Detailed about how many times I know for some offerings you can't burn it. Some offerings you have to save the entrails and wash it. Some offerings the priest flicks blood 7 times. It's different. And only the Lord can.
Only the Lord can instruct you to do it.
Okay, so here it is. Some more offering instructions, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some offering instructions that seem strange to modern Christians. We've already said that, right? And it have to do with health and sanitation issues.
Yeah.
What do you see here that applies today?
You think? So, okay. Health and sanitation. Okay, just the blood, just the way that they had to kill the animal. Mm-hmm. And I just know that there was a lot of blood,
and I
right?
Think this is in the tabernacle.
Also, I mean, you got to think there must have been some sort of struggle or the animal being screaming or whatever. They didn't take it under first. It was just like they just...
they spread it on the walls, too.
Yeah, so I think it must have gotten really messy. And if you think about how there's no running water, I was thinking about how when they're talking about washing this stuff off, you really can't get all of that out.
Hose,
You're just kind of rinsing it off in a tub or something. Yeah. So just as far as sanitation is concerned, I would think, and then just because an animal doesn't have blemish, we don't know if it still is not diseased. And I mean, they had a fire and the fire kept burning at all times. And so I've worked in the food industry for some time. So I know what temp you have to get something up to. But I was thinking to myself, how do you know that an animal is good to eat? And how do you know that there's no blood on you or on the food? It just seemed...
Oh, there was blood everywhere.
There had to be blood everywhere. There had to be so much blood everywhere that you just don't know where the blood went. It's just like it's on your clothes, it's on your hands. You thought you washed it all off, but you didn't. So just, I guess, as it relates to our modern day sort of customs as compared to back then, it just seems like, and this was instructed by God, so I'm sure there was no alternative, right? I would have done it. But I just think now we have higher sanitation. We have more focus on sanitation, and we have running water. And we have just special soap, antibacterial soap, and we keep our food separate so it doesn't get cross-contaminated. And we just have special things that we know now to do based on, I guess, people getting sick in the past.
You can only assume that there's no refrigeration, or maybe they're probably treating it a little differently, storage and but
even like insects that could carry disease and how they were storing it. That's a good point too. I didn't think about that.
And how, I mean, the tabernacle, just the way they describe it, it just seems like it's a lot going on.
Yeah.
And I don't know how it would look nowadays.
It would look crazy nowadays only because we've now grown accustomed to doing things this way. But
back then it probably was just like, okay, here it is.
We're such social creatures that whatever environment we're in, we're going to adapt to the environment and we're going to assimilate to the culture that we're in. So I would, like, if this was the instruction and God is over this place and we can feel his presence, we're going to be obedient. And it just probably didn't even strike them as weird. It was just another day.
And I don't think they got, to be honest, you know, how nowadays it's like, well, if you eat meat, you get food poisoning. I'm going to probably be 100% honest. there was no food poisoning.
I don't know that.
I, I, I
But God was over this thing.
that's
Yeah,
my
yeah.
point. I'm not saying it didn't exist, but I'm saying during one of these offerings, you're not getting sick from eating the meat.
If God
Especially
told
if
you to
God
do
told you to do
something,
it. If God said, because some offerings He says don't eat it,
yeah,
but some He
yeah.
says eat it. And then when He says eat it, I'm assuming they cook it regularly. I don't think they. Well, I don't know. If God says, listen, you
I
got
don't
to
know,
eat
but
it.
you know what this is speaking to me?
You
Just
know.
modern day. It's like sometimes we get into this thing where we know we heard from God just individually,
Mm-hmm.
like, oh man, God
Yeah.
just told me this,
Mm-hmm.
or I know better than this based on what I know,
Mm-hmm.
right? The conversations I'm having with God. And it seems to not messy, but it just seems like there's benefit in not doing it.
Mm-hmm.
But you know that it's instruction from God. So the alternative, well, we saw one of the alternatives when you do something different than what his instructions. We saw it later in
Mm-hmm.
this
You're gonna
in this
get.
reader in
Yeah.
this reading. But it's like when you think about God telling you to do something that you don't want to do.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that happens today,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or even just sacrificing or offering even,
Mm-hmm.
right? So it's sacrificing something from you. And it's interesting because we kind of go through that modern day, and I always try to give to people who are in need, but sometimes I don't, and I feel guilty about it because I'm like, well, if I gave everybody who asked, right, then whatever. But it's like, I'm just kind of guilty in that way where I'm thinking
Mm-hmm.
about it now. Like, oh, that man asked me for, some money
Mm-hmm.
outside and I didn't give it to him. And so, but we all have our downfalls. But it's so interesting because there are times when people, especially like family and friends, where I can devote my time or my monetary whatever, and it feels good. So that kind of
Mm-hmm.
goes back to the other question. When you do give,
Yeah.
it does feel good.
Yeah. Yeah.
It feels good. It feels like you contributed. It feels like you made a difference. Like you were obedient. That you helped where you needed to help. Whatever.
Yeah. I mean, I think. No, I'm not gonna say I think. I know that if God told you to do something, do it. But here it is. We're in our own heads about, oh, is it sanitary? I told you to do it. I got you.
Yeah.
Right? And just like you said, that sometimes He'll tell us instructions and we won't listen to it because it sounds ridiculous.
It sounds messy or ridiculous
It's
to
like,
us.
oh, God, I don't think I can
I
do
don't think
that.
so.
I told you to do
I
it.
told you to do it. And I told you to do it this specific
This
way.
you know? So, that goes, and we need to listen.
And now that I think about it,
Mm-hmm.
oh wow, this just hit me. This is crazy. Sometimes we don't know why God wants us to do things in a specific way.
Mm-hmm.
You just brought up the food poisoning thing, right?
Yeah.
Maybe some of these specific instructions were the reasons why they wouldn't get food poisoning.
Yeah.
Right? Because they
The way it
weren't
was.
eating certain parts.
They weren't eating.
They had to keep the fire burning at all times.
Yep.
And then they had to do certain things like
Mm-hmm.
sprinkle the blood over here, do this, do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they had the big, I call it a grill, but it's like a burnt offering contraption.
So
Maybe the specific instructions that he was giving was what kept them from harming themselves with food poisoning or sanitation. Because like I said, sometimes you get a specific instruction from God and you don't know exactly what it's for or why He's instructing you to do it, but you do it anyway, and then it ends up being somewhere else. You hear these stories sometimes where it's like, God just told me to give this to you, and then you realize, oh my God, I can't believe that God did that because I really needed this right now.
Yep.
Right? Did you tell me a story about an Uber driver? Right? Somebody, I might have been online, but this was such a small thing. This guy had moved and he ordered Chipotle or something like that from Uber. And he realized after waiting for his food for a minute that, like, oh my gosh, my address was set up. And I've done that before too. I've ordered something from Uber Eats and realized, like, oh my gosh, I ordered it to the wrong address. I ordered it to my work address instead of my home address, right? You gotta go in there and catch it right away. But in this case, the guy didn't do that, and he realized after waiting for his food for so long that, oh, I sent it to the wrong address where I used to live. I just never updated the address. So he ended up telling the Uber driver, like, just keep it. Right? It's just a Chipotle or whatever, right? Like, just keep it. And the Uber driver didn't respond at first, and then he came back and was like, you don't know how much this means to me, because last year around this time, I lost my brother, and this spot that I was supposed to deliver to you is really close by where we buried him. So he just went to the cemetery and ate the food and just kind of hung out with his dead brother at the cemetery. Yeah. So it's those little things that you don't know why you're doing something, but it's just like, oh my God, you have no idea how you just helped me, and you're just being obedient to God. Yeah. So we don't know why God asked us to do stuff. It's just important that we follow a specific instruction. Yes. So anyway.
So Leviticus 8 through 10. Mm-hmm. It has the regulations of the offerings.
Yes.
Preparation for the priest.
Yes.
And 2 of Aaron's sons die. Now, so this goes into preparation of how the priests need to get prepared, what they need to wear, how they need to accept everything. Now, when it says 2 of Aaron's sons die, they didn't follow instructions. So, we all have to understand. The Lord is very specific, right? We know that by now from Noah, and the Lord from the building of the tabernacle. The Lord gives very specific instructions. If you think you're like, man, God talk to me, it's going to be very specific. He's going to say, do this way. And this way. It's not going to be like, all right, you should do this. It's not going to say, he's going to be like, I need you to do this way, and call it this. Mm-hmm. And you're going to be like, well, that doesn't make sense. I didn't ask you all that. Mm-hmm. So his sons are in the tabernacle, which we already know is the most holy place. Tabernacle is the most holy place. It has the Ark of the Covenant, the 10 Commandments, has the laws of God. It's built specifically for God. Yeah. This is the most holy place, right? God is in there. Mm-hmm. Even it's a cloud saying God is here. Yeah. So this is the most holy place. And they were uninstructed. They just started lighting fires. I'm
going to read it because it's Leviticus 10. Yes. Right at the beginning of Leviticus 10. So basically Leviticus 10:1. Yes. Now Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, each took his censer and put fire in it and laid incense on it and offered unauthorized fire before the Lord, which he had not commanded them. And fire came out from before the Lord and consumed them, and they died before the Lord. This is right in front of Moses and Aaron. So you got to think these are Aaron's 2 sons. They're going along with these customs. They literally follow every instruction up until this point. Yep. And then whatever idea got in their head that, oh, we're going to do this. And it wasn't instructed. It wasn't even like it wasn't even like they got a second chance. It was just like, nope, got to take you out. And it must have been so shocking and hurtful for them to witness that happen to their relatives. Mm-hmm. Those weren't Aaron's only 2 sons, but it's just for God to take them out like that, just so, because they were in the sacred tabernacle. And I'm imagining that's probably why, and I'm imagining that because they were ordained to be the holy ones that were going to be making the sacrifices, they were going to be the priests. I guess it was just this thing where it's like, well, I got to take you out, because if you're setting this sort of example for everyone and this is what you do in the tabernacle, there's just no way, right, to get past this. God just knows best. So he just took them. But I was just imagining how shocking that must have been. Yeah. for them to have to go that way, but they just did something that
Yeah.
they weren't instructed to do.
And I wholeheartedly believe they're in heaven. They just didn't follow the right instructions at the right time.
Yeah.
And, you know, and it happens, right? So this is why the saying is be fearful of the Lord, right? He gives you very specific instructions, tells you don't do it. And if you do it, it's a possibility that you die, because this isn't the first time, it's not going to be the last time, but in the Bible, you're at the holiest place, and the Lord says He's giving you specific instructions, and you don't follow them, there are consequences.
Yeah. Yeah, and you don't know what those are sometimes until it's too late.
Until it's too late. So the lesson is follow the specific instructions of the Lord, no matter how they might sound.
So this isn't even really a question, it's just like a prompt.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it says, surrounding pagan cultures were demanding human sacrifices. Reflect on the only human sacrifice God sanctified in the Judeo-Christian history.
In the Judeo-Christian history.
Judeo. Oh, sorry.
So we know that was Jesus.
Yeah.
Pagan. It says surrounding pagan cultures were demanding human sacrifices as opposed to the animal sacrifices.
Yeah.
This isn't the question like why, but I'll just reflect on this, kind of like give what I think. I would think that you can't. The reason that you can't make human sacrifices is because they're humans. You just don't want to decide for God. God's gonna decide when somebody goes and all that. And so if He, and a lot of times we learn through making mistakes or witnessing other people make mistakes. So if God is gonna use you, right, you shouldn't just be sacrificed because another human thinks you should be sacrificed. God is going to use you through His will, and if you can learn to be if you can learn to have atonement and be submissive to God, then He can use you for good. He can use what happens to you for good. And I just don't think it should be up to humans, right, to decide who's going to be the human sacrifice. Because it's just like, what are you basing that on? So God's going to take out who He thinks should be taken out, and not necessarily for good or bad. It's just like He's deciding that. So it's not for good based on whether somebody did good or bad, right, or what we think. It's God's plan. So let's leave that sacrificing of humans up to God, and He's gonna tell us what's what. And so go ahead.
Well, I think two things. Number one, I think it had to be Jesus. Yes, we believe Jesus died on the cross for our sins, and that's grace. That's the ultimate sacrifice. So the first thing is why I think you shouldn't kill humans. Number one, I agree with you. It is God's choice. Another interesting thing is that we were created in His image. All of us were. And when you sacrifice humans, that's leaving you up to your own devices. Who gives you the right to decide on who's right and who's wrong from your logic?
Yeah. Who's going to be the sacrifice? Right?
Why do you determine that you think that you can go out here and you're the law when you don't even know what law is? You don't even know, in the words what God said, you don't even know to determine what dew is. You don't even know how to create a star. You don't even know how the earth works. But you could determine to sacrifice
a human that He created.
So let's just leave that up to God.
Mm-hmm.
Because, to be honest with you, not only reading the Bible, but even myself, I don't make the best choices.
None of us do.
So what gives me taking a life is a huge choice, and it shouldn't be up. We can't even determine if we can. Some people, it's hard to walk and chew bubblegum, guys. For real, to be honest, you can determine what makes you the person to determine that a human needs to die. That's not up to you. That's up to God.
Yeah.
So you need to drink your water and mind your business and praise God. Like, just
right.
God has given everybody specific instructions.
Yeah, and he'll handle it. So
Yeah.
when we're talking about Jesus dying for our sins, like, thank God, literally, because we all sin.
Yeah.
So even the person who would think we're going to make this human sacrifice, that person who says you're going to be the sacrifice chooser, right? You did a sin too. So why not you?
Yep.
Right? So it's like, you gotta just trust God on that one, right? If he brought you in the world, there's just certain things that we can't even control, and people's lives are lost from those things. So I just think that the reason that Jesus died for our sins, now we have a place to be forgiven. Now we have an opportunity to be forgiven for our sins. Yeah. So you can't just take people out. That's my reflection on that. Yeah. It wasn't really a question, but that was just kind of our interpretation of the reflection.
Drinking water, mind your business. A person's choice is a person. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, just listen. Stop focusing on what everybody is going around, and that person should do that, and that person do that, when God is telling you, like, hey, should do this. Follow what he says, man. And I can only imagine how many goats I would have, and sheep and rams, if it was back then. But people fear God more, so there's a difference in what is going on. Because sometimes I think, to be honest, sometimes nowadays God's kind of convoluted, I guess.
The ideas of
it's watered down
reverence.
Enough. Yeah.
Now listen to this. So this is a good point. This kind of goes back into what we read with when they came up with all the rules, which I think was in Exodus. When we started to hear the covenant and the commandments and things like that. This is really the sacrifice. The sacrifices, or the idea that you would have to sacrifice after you sinned or after you did something wrong, is just more of a reason to not do something wrong when you know there's a consequence. Yes. We just talked about consequences, cause and effect earlier this week, and there's just this idea that if you know you only got 4 goats, right, you're not gonna be sinning all the time. You're gonna be like, oh well, last time I had to sacrifice a goat, and that cost me a lot. Now it's a lot harder to do this work. Now we're down a goat. We can't be down 2 goats, so let me just think before I do something that will require me to sacrifice, right? Yes. And so I think that has a lot to do with it too.
And you're right, because back then, let's go on the journey, right? They're slaves. They get brought out of slavery. They see God part the Red Sea, then close it back up, right? They're getting fed in the wilderness by bread in the morning.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
This is what they're seeing live, right? So, and then the tabernacle, well, no, not the tabernacle, the laws, the 10 Commandments get, right? Now watch this. God leads them to their own devices. They create a golden bull and they worship it, right? Now the people that say, oh, I shouldn't have done that, they saw God get rid of the people
who were just like, no,
we're going to worship this bull. So you have to see, back then, just like you said, not only like, man, I can't give another goat, but I've seen God
at work, and I
At
don't
work,
want that to
I
happen to
don't
me.
want that to happen, man. I'm just gonna.
I'd rather just go through whatever
Yeah,
it takes to be
yeah.
obedient
Be
than to
obedient,
see,
man.
you know what I'm saying? Than to
Yeah,
have to keep sacrificing and to have to keep. I mean, you're gonna sin anyway,
yeah,
right? You're gonna have these moments where you just it just didn't work out for you. You just couldn't help yourself,
yeah,
or the devil was at play and you just got caught up.
yeah,
Or you're gonna have these moments of temptation where you just weren't able to quite be your best self,
yeah.
right? But if you can help it, then you're going to, because you don't want to happen to you what
Mm-hmm.
happened to Aaron's sons,
Mm-hmm.
and you don't want to keep having to sacrifice
Yeah,
all of your goods because you keep messing up. So some of it is just a deterrent,
yeah.
right? It's just a way to be okay. It's a reminder to live
Mm-hmm.
well, live better, learn from that.
Yeah. Leviticus 11 through 13.
Mm-hmm.
It talks about animals considered clean. We got to talk about that. That was very interesting.
Yeah.
Purification after childbirth
Uh-huh.
and the cleaning of skin diseases and mold. So, animals considered clean. This is interesting
It was interesting.
because it talked about you shouldn't eat. Okay, so it said that if an animal had parted hooves but ate cud, and we had to
find out what cud was.
And I mean, okay, you gotta look it up for yourself, but from what I got from the definition is, if an animal is eating grass, it chews it like, swallows it, then regurgitates it again, and continues to chew the same grass. So I looked it up, and we looked it up, and I was like, oh man, this is nasty. But it goes down of what we should eat and not eat, and I mean it talks about camels,
Hare. It talks about a hare, which is a rabbit.
rabbit, the pig,
Yeah.
the rock badger, which I found that was interesting. They talked
Swarming
about
creatures in the water
swarm,
that
yep.
don't have fins, scales that
Yep,
don't have
there are
scales.
fins. Yep.
And then the most interesting to me was when they got into the birds,
Yes.
right? Because we don't currently, I don't think, eat any of those birds.
No,
The
hawks,
eagle,
owls.
I mean, ostriches. I don't know if people eat ostrich. I don't know what people eat in other countries.
Yeah.
But
Black vultures. I was like,
the
people eat
bat,
vultures?
all of these birds are birds that we don't eat
The
current
heron.
day.
Now I've seen. So okay, guys. I love watching cooking shows. I love grilling. I love cooking. Right, it's one of my passions. She knows this, and I watch all types of stuff, man. I'm not even I'm talking about. I watch Top Chef, Chopped, Guys Grocery Games, Iron Chef. I can
Bobby
name
Flay.
B. Bobby Flay.
Oh my gosh.
I
He
can
watches
name
them
them.
all,
I can
guys.
name them Fire Grill Chefs, Man
Oh
Fire
my gosh,
Food.
This is a commercial.
Yeah,
Food
yeah,
Network,
yeah. Anyway,
Food
yeah.
Network. Go
Food
ahead and run
Network.
us
Yeah,
that
yeah,
check.
yeah. I like watching a lot of those shows, and one of the shows was Bizarre Foods. I like too, and there it's very interesting because I've seen people eat like herons, and if you don't know, a heron is a freshwater bird that
Like a stork or
like
something?
a stork, but the meat it looks like steak.
Oh.
Yeah, and they eat it like steak. So it's just very interesting. I'm not gonna lie, guys. I've eaten a lot of things that you're not supposed to eat according to the Bible. I've eaten.
Well, I mean, this is back in the day. This
and
is
plus,
the custom.
plus Jesus died for all my sins. So.
Yeah, but I mean, look, we're not. So there's certain things
Yeah.
in here, like when they were doing the we just made the comment about doing the sacrifice.
Yeah, this is.
I don't know if this stuff is present day.
No.
And they had another culture, so
Yeah.
I don't know that this is
No.
You know what I mean? Our instructions for today, because obviously we're not going to be sacrificing no rams in the backyard or something like this, you know? So I think this is the story of what happened. I don't know that.
I don't think it's.
But it was interesting to me that we still don't eat some of this stuff.
No. But it has. Listen, it has. You're not supposed to eat. You know, it talks about you can eat crickets, but you're not supposed to eat. I think ants.
You're not supposed to eat something without.
And
wings.
You're supposed to
any
eat
winged animal.
Yeah.
What did it say? All other winged insects which are four-footed are detestable to you.
Yeah.
So
it's a lot of stuff, man. If we lived it, this would be a lot of people eat a lot of these things that are mentioned that you're not supposed to eat. And
like I said, this is another culture.
Yeah.
Also, depending on where you live in the world.
Yeah.
Like sometimes these are the only things that are available to eat.
Yeah. You know, like
the gecko, the crocodile, the lizard, the sand reptile, the chameleon. Yeah. These creatures are unclean. It goes and it lists a bunch of animals. Yeah. It's a very interesting read.
It is very interesting, man, and it's.
And then they go into not even just unclean animals, but how people are treated when they have leprosy, like when they have.
Oh, let's do the childbirth. It talks about.
Oh
that.
Yeah, it does. It talks about after I guess when you have a boy, when you have a male child. I think it's 7 days.
Unclean. Be unclean 7 days.
Yeah.
If a woman has a son.
And then she's considered unclean for longer if it's a female that she gave birth to.
Yeah.
I have some thoughts on that too. Go ahead.
Yeah. No, it's 7 to 14 days. It depends on the gender, and then the second stage of either being impure or impure lasts 33 to 60 days. Mm-hmm. And then she offers sacrifices and to enter into full communion with the covenant. So it looks like it's because of the menstruating or her giving childbirth. So what's your thoughts on it?
Again, this is a custom of a different time, but I know that when you do have a child, there are a number of weeks that you should wait before you engage in sexual activity, and I think it's also for the protection of the female's body. So again, we see all of these rules for how things were done with the sacrifices on how to cook the food, and we wondered whether that could have protected them from getting food poisoning, just the specific way. This is the right way and this is the wrong way according to God. And perhaps with the childbirth in particular, there's several reasons for it, right? God gives you an instruction and you're just going to follow it because it's God. But perhaps that was just early modern, not even science, but just the obedience to God is protecting you in another way, because if you consider to be unclean or consider a woman to be unclean after she gives childbirth, well, good, because you could hurt her. She just gave birth to a child, guys. Why don't you just let her chill for a bit? Yeah. I think that these early sort of instructions worked perhaps in more than one way. Same thing with the question. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, but no, I like that because there's no.
The question was pick some rules and state how you feel they protected people. Yeah. So that's kind of what I started doing because I looked at the question.
But I like that. Well, I didn't even realize that. That's very interesting. You said I think it's 6 to 8 weeks after you give.
Yeah, and it's depending. I mean, and I know that everybody doesn't really follow that, but in general,
very interesting. It says it in here though. It says 33 to 66 days. So maybe that's.
And then they didn't have modern medicine where you could get a checkup by the doctor necessarily. It actually sounded like in some of these instances, especially when they talk about leprosy, that the priest was considered the doctor. Yeah. It's like, let him examine you and see if the leprosy is spread or if there's a white hair in it or whatever. So it seemed like he was doing some of the earlier on examinations. Yeah. But the study of medicine is only, just like science, it's only the study. Mm-hmm. Right? So if you're receiving instruction from God, it could be considered a miracle because it hasn't been proven. But if you're receiving instruction from God and you're close to God and you know that God wants you to do something, that's probably protection before we can prove it.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So some of this stuff is interesting because even in the way of just in general, just the rules of Christianity, some people might say that, well, I'm not doing all that because that's just not fair to me. Like, I'm going to do what I want to do because this is what I think is right. And you really just don't know. You have, in my opinion, right, in my humble opinion, you just have nothing to lose by following God's laws because you don't know everything, but God does. So if you're just trying to be out here advocating for what you think is right, I mean, what is that based on? And then the next person might disagree with that. But if you're both connected to God and following God's laws, I just feel like you just can't go wrong. And we watched that one podcast where Steve Harvey had mentioned, well, what if you do all this stuff? And one of his friends had asked him on his religion, who he's also Christian, what do you think, about this? If you're doing all of this stuff, following all these laws of Christianity, and then you die, and then there is no heaven. And Steve Harvey, I liked his answer. He was like, well, I guess that's possible, right? But considering that, it's far riskier to do the alternative, right? Like, if I live my whole life with hope and with a set of guidelines that has so far worked out, you know what I'm saying? In my experience, particularly, I've not met anybody who's ever said, I've just been following all of God's rules and it's not working. It's just, I've never seen that or heard that before. But anyway, if that were the case, that you did everything that you're supposed to do by the laws of God, and you die and then there's no heaven, well, I lived a good life. Right? But if you did that and you weren't following God's laws and there is a heaven, you've got a much bigger problem, my friend. So I like the way that he answered that, and I paraphrased.
Not only following God's laws, but believing in Jesus.
Yes.
God's law.
Yes, for sure. That's the
right?
That's the part.
Said,
that part right there.
The life, right?
Believing in Jesus and believing that He died for our sins. Yeah. Just having a reverence for God in that way, and knowing that He gave a sacrifice, right, to us. It just is. I mean, it's such an amazing thing when you think about it.
So
okay. Speaking to some of the rules and stating how you feel, how they protected people, specifically about what God's animals that were animals that were considered clean.
I'm telling you,
purification after childbirth, and cleaning skin diseases and the mold. How do you feel these rules protected people?
They did, and
how?
I don't know.
All right, I'll just keep going.
I'm gonna eat some alligator.
Well, here's
a rabbit. God. Okay, so listen, here it is for real. I think that God knows, once again, to be serious. Once again, I think God knows what can give us food poisoning and what can't. And you have to think about this. All the animals that He mentioned, you can, listen, don't eat this because there's a higher possibility
that you'll get sick or die. What is that one? Blowfish? Yeah. Well, that wasn't in there, but we were talking about blowfish.
Does it have scales?
I don't know, but we were talking about
if it's poison. It's probably, we're not supposed to eat it.
And we don't really know back then what these animals were eating and what those animals were sort of, what the circumstances of how they were living. Yes. Now that we have all this technology and we've done all these studies on how to properly prepare food, probably learning from people who got sick. Yeah. And learning, I guess we should do it like this, right?
Now we know about temperatures.
We know about temperatures. We know about, even in the OBGYN space, I was reading something about how back in the day, these women used to die after childbirth, and it kept happening. And some doctors got together and figured out they weren't cleaning the instrument, they weren't washing their hands. So basically what happened was, which is wild. We just learn. We learn as we go along. But what was happening in this particular instance was, and they called this something. It was like black something. It wasn't the Black Plague, but basically, one of the doctors were experiencing like, oh, these women are catching these infections, and we need to figure out why. I guess it had happened a few times. So then a couple of the doctors got together and they were working on corpses to see if they could figure out why the women died after childbirth, and then they were going back and giving more care to pregnant women, and then they kept dying and they couldn't figure out what was going on until it dawned on them that, oh, because we're working on corpses and we're not washing our hands and we're going back and giving care to other pregnant women, and then there's toxic things involved in that because they weren't washing their hands. And so look, even that, so that kind of brings me into my next thing right there about picking some of the reasons or how I feel about the rules protecting people. We have so many studies now on the washing of hands and on the environments that we should keep food in, how things have to be refrigerated to 40 degrees, or how you have to salt it and preserve it, and how we bring up the blowfish example because in some cultures they eat blowfish, but if you prepare it improperly, it's poisonous and you could die. And it's a specific kind, because there's another kind of blowfish that I guess that's farm raised that doesn't apply to, but I still just won't have any, thank you. But my thought is this: the purification after childbirth is one thing that prompted this example, but even the cleaning in the skin diseases and mold, that also reminded me of something that's happened present day or recently with COVID, because the rules protect people, because if you have a skin disease, especially back in the day where there wasn't a bunch of modern medicine, they would make them sort of, our term was quarantine, right? You got to be isolated for 7 days, and then the priest would check it out and examine you again. And if it had spread, then you have to be quarantined again. And if it didn't spread, then you could kind of, whatever, be back amongst the people. When a person had a skin disease, they were considered unclean. They had to wear something specific, and they had to walk around and scream out, "Unclean, unclean." It's so horrible that I thought that was funny. I'm so mature. But I just thought about it present day. You go to the doctor these days and people come out of there, they be having all types of stuff, right? STDs, just different stuff that could have possibly been avoided, and some that they can't. But if you think of something that is like sort of transmissible, you don't have, HIPAA laws protect you from having to admit it to everyone. It could be something that's embarrassing. It could be something, but as we've just experienced with COVID, best practice is to say, oh, I've been exposed, so that you can then protect other people. So that was kind of their way of saying unclean. Unclean was just a way for you to announce that, hey guys, I got something. I've got an itch or a rash or a spot or a boil, and I don't want you near me because it could be transmissible. But just the idea that they would isolate for a number of days and then get it checked out again, that was protecting people. And just the idea of saying you're unclean and making people aware that, like, you should be cautious. I think that was a law that protected people.
I think so. So two things. When you said that study, they were working on dead people and then going back and delivering babies. That didn't happen back then. Only the priests. So I'm just saying, even though the reason the women probably died because of the uncleanliness, that wouldn't have happened back then because there were laws.
Right.
You can't be around the dead and delivering birth.
Right.
Because you're unclean.
Yeah, they did say that. If you touch a carcass of an animal or a carcass of a body, like, you're unclean. That was another thing. So see how these laws were pre-scientific fact for us. We think facts
can't be delivering babies after you touch a dead body.
No.
The Bible says you
and
cannot.
If you think about how, man, this is wild that we're making this connection right now. If you think about how seriously it was taken to be in the tabernacle.
Yes.
And Aaron and his sons had to follow specific rituals of washing one's feet, washing these things, right? And the way that they had to handle the blood and do these certain things was so specific, right? And they had to basically be clean before they entered the tabernacle, right? So then it made sense that they would be the ones who would be the examiners because they were considered to be careful about that sort of thing. So again, we see where God's laws and God's rules are protecting us before we even know what science is. Science is just a study of what already happened. Whereas God's laws are preemptive. God is telling you what to do before you get yourself in trouble. And you can find out after the fact, like, oh, that's why that wasn't a good idea. Or you can just go ahead and listen to God.
Right. Or read the Bible, because you wouldn't be messing with corpses because you're unclean.
Right. That's so interesting, James.
You're not like, so that's why priests probably were considered in all of these aspects, because they're clean.
Yeah, they're clean.
Right? And they're holy, which holy is clean. Right?
And they're probably the most familiar with God's laws.
Yes. And they're like, okay, I can check you for leprosy. You know, I don't have it because I spend my time in the tabernacle.
Right. And then I follow these specific procedures to be in the tabernacle.
Yes.
Right? Like I have to follow God's laws just to even be what God told me to be. So I know this stuff and I'm practicing it because I'm in the tabernacle.
So that's very interesting.
Wow, that is interesting.
I think, once again, man, I think that we tend to forget how much is in the Bible because we're not reading it.
Yeah.
And we're not reading it, and it's applicable to today, right?
So applicable.
So it's just like what Faith says, that's go crazy. Oh, reason why women are dying is because we're touching dead bodies. Yes, if you would read Leviticus, you know that you're unclean.
It's wild to me too, because
be doing that. There are two separate things that's going on here. And those are doctors. Nothing wrong with doctors. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that sometimes if we're left on devices, we do things that that is unfortunate. Because we don't know. It does mention vitiligo in here as well. I think it's different procedures with that. Because it wasn't leprosy. Yeah, but it's very interesting that it is mentioned back here, and it had to be a very serious disease if it's mentioned, you know. So.
Yeah, but I think what was happening was it could be, so sometimes it could be leprosy or sometimes it could be vitiligo, but vitiligo is just a condition.
It's just a condition.
So it's like, oh, okay, you're good. We thought you were having this.
And I guess that's why they were doing the 7 days.
To see what it was.
Skin, I think that's what leprosy
whether
did.
It was infected.
Yeah, so.
So moving along into what another things are just becoming so clear as we read. It's just so interesting. Yeah. One of the other people that we sort of follow and appreciate, his name is Myron Golden, and he talks a lot about the Bible and the principles of the Bible that have helped him be successful. I bring him up for a couple of reasons, but one of the things that he was saying, he was making the point that, this is Myron Golden, that do you remember everything you read? Right? And it's like, no, of course I don't remember everything I read. No, because you have to go back. It's repetition that helps you learn. And one of the things that is just with us, with humans, is like we forget stuff. Even things that we know and that we're familiar with, we forget it. So reading the Bible in itself is just a great practice to have, because it just brings you back into the Word. It counters you back into the Word, which makes you more familiar with God's instructions. And as you grow, you're encountering some of the same information, but it hits you differently because now you've morphed into a whole different person. You've become something better or something greater than you were the first time you encountered the information. So I just think it's really interesting just how when we're encountering the Word, it just feeds us on so many levels. There's a calming element, there's a reminding element, there's all these things that just pop up that are just mind-blowing, that are relevant to us present day. And really, one of my questions was based out of a lot of things that are happening current day in our culture, and thinking about what we're exposing ourselves to. And I was going to ask you this: who do you watch that feeds positivity into you? right? So I just put him on the spot there, but I already have some answers that I'll go in and share.
Yeah.
We kind of talked about this earlier because we were talking about how just the way that mainstream media paired with social media can lead you into this sort of frenzy where nothing is being resolved and you're just sort of stuck in this weird cycle of taking in things that aren't necessarily useful for what you're doing, what your passion is. And what's fun is to find people who are feeding you positivity and are feeding you information that is beneficial to you, that provides solutions, that is feeding your spirit, that is reminding you of the good parts of life and that of what you should and could be doing. Hopefully we're adding to that, right? Reading the Bible. I'll just go in and say, we always say, don't take our word for it. Go to the source, read your Bible. And that is just a very simple statement just to say when things are going, especially when things are going awry, but just as a regular habit, when you pick up your Bible and you start reading it, it gives you this sense of peace. And sometimes the answer could have been right in front of you the whole time, but it takes for you to just immerse yourself in the word. And then certain things just start to come to you. It's a way of connecting with God. And then you can be peaceful. And then he reveals to you what your instructions are. Sometimes you might not read something and it hits you right then. But when you're seeking the peace of God, and you're making a way for him to communicate with you, he'll send you your answer. If you're quiet and you pray and you read his word, he will send you his answer. You just have to be silent and hear it. So anyway, I wanted to ask you, who are some of the people who you seek that add positivity to your passion and your feed in your life? One of them is Myron Golden. Like I said, he has all of these principles that he's learned from the Bible that he has used to become successful and to just the way that he lives his life. And so I definitely want to raise him up. Also, I may have talked about her before, but this lady that I love named Jenny Penton, and she's the CEO of Planet Perfect, which is a planning company. She makes journals and artwork, and she's pretty awesome. And sometimes just listening to her is just really helpful to me because she's a mom of 8 children and a grandmother, and she just has lived life and she's just so positive. And so listening to her, I obviously enjoy her artwork and her products and stuff, but just listening to her talk about just the lessons she's learned from reading the Bible over so many years and using it in her marriage, using it while she's raising her kids. It's just a wonderful reminder. So it just kind of brought me to that because I'm like, I also listen to lots of other people and I follow different social media accounts and different podcasts that help me bring a positive sort of outlook to my day and my week. I think I've already mentioned Face Over Matter. I'm going to have all these links in the bio, but please feel free to share who are the people you follow who add positivity into your life, into your passion, who speak positivity that you consider to be positive additions to your life. So who do you think? Who could you say?
Yeah, I would say I like Myron Golden. Yeah, he speaks a word. I'm also say this is cliche, but Pastor Pope.
Oh, absolutely.
Maybe they give a word, man. A shout out to David Shands, Donnie Wiggins with Social Proof. They're positive and they give a different outlook, and they remind me of my friends. And Mel Robbins is another one that's really good with positivity. I'm gonna say Earn Your Leisure, and then they have a whole university. That's who we watched the Steve Harvey interview from. Wall Street Trapper, 19 Keys, another one, different perspective, but positive. I'm trying to think who else is on my feed.
obviously we've already mentioned our Pastor Pope, United
Yeah.
Baptist Church. There's a couple of people who you'll see there who just have always a positive word. Listen to Stephen Furtick. He's really funny and he's always talking about the word. He's a pastor as well. This young lady, her name is Ariel Fitzpatrick. She has a beautiful voice and she's on Instagram. That's where I discovered her. That's where James sent her to me. And she's really funny, but she's a young person. Also, China McClain.
Yes.
Always has some really interesting insights. We want you to share because we want to know. We're out here living this social media life too. So it's time that we consider perhaps what's feeding us and what's not. And not to say that you need to delete people out of your feed, but you should definitely have some good in there too, so that you're not just bombarded with negativity. So we just want to mention that, and we want to know from you so that we can have even more people to follow who are speaking positivity and adding positivity into the social media space. So if you know of anyone, please, by all means, comment below and let us know who they are and what positivity they've added to your life. You could even tag them so they could see that you made the comment. That would be great. And we're certainly going to want to go and follow them so we could add to the positivity that we're experiencing. So we'll have all those links down below so that you can go and check those people out on their platforms and you can follow them. I'll say it one more time. Don't take our word for it. Go to the source. Read your Bible.
All right, guys. So next week we're reading Leviticus 14 through 23. All right. So once again, come and join us on that so we can go through this journey together. All right, guys. Peace.
Peace.